and he added some like fun pop quizzes in there too. But I'm going to take you through what I've went through with the CS team, just because it's like easier to understand from a customer standpoint. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the problem with our old framework when I first took over the GC squad was that everything, here, let me put this in presentation mode. Everything was ending up being a long list of privileges. So if you guys have seen this like roles and permissioning dashboard here, it was turning into like this concept of ABAC, where like this user, if they were shared a task, would be able to do X. This user who was shared a task would be able to do Y. And no one was able to remember like what privileges someone was given in their role. And it was becoming a really, really long list. So managing users at scale was very difficult. And we wanted to basically make it so that your role was super simple. Like what your role was able to do was either like you're an admin or you're not, or you can do like maybe budgeting is an exception, but we wanted to make it so that permissions were granted on top of someone's role explicitly through what we're calling object-based permissioning, rather than having to remember what a role is able to do or not able to do. So I don't want to go too much into the pricing around this, but we have, you guys know that there's module-based permissioning now. That doesn't mean that you can turn off it by the whole instance. So it just means that for that person's role, they are going to see like calendar, campaigns, tasks, and requests, for example. The biggest thing to keep in mind here is that even if a user, let's say a user only has library module turned on for them, that user can still be shared a task or a campaign, and they can still get access to that through the task tray or through their email notification. So we are no longer like stopping anyone from being shared something, even if they don't have access to tasks or campaign, but we're just making it so that they have a limited view. So if you find that a customer is coming to you and they're saying, hey, I'm getting all these tasks, but I don't have a way to manage them, that might be a conversation to have with the account manager and saying, hey, we might need to upgrade this user because they actually want to get access to the task module or the calendar module. But we don't want to prohibit them from getting access to something that is being granted to them explicitly. So a common use case is the request module. A lot of times we added a lot of complexity where if you were a requester and you wanted to see inside of a task, they were trying to make it like super confusing. Right now, what we're saying is that if somebody mentions someone in a task or shares them the task or assigns them the step in a task, they can do that. There's no like friction from being like, this user doesn't have access to tasks and therefore you can't allow them to be assigned. Does that make sense? So it's a much more like open permission model. And it does mean that we've created a lot of permissions code to account for if a person doesn't have access to the campaign, they can still get access to the task or they can still be assigned a step. So we're trying to make sure we account for all of those scenarios so that anytime someone's explicitly shared something, there isn't this like weird error message that they get. They are granted that share. Okay, so this is
hey
like
Lauren, Lauren, I have a question. If a user is assigned to a task and the user doesn't have access to the campaign, he should be able to view the task from the task tray still, right?
If he has access to the task module?
To the, if he has access to the, if he is assigned to any step, right, and doesn't have access to the campaign, but he should be able to view the task from the task tray, right?
Yes. However, if you're seeing a bug around that, it's because we have like a super wonky thing that's happening right now.
What I have seen earlier, that if a user is assigned to a task and he doesn't have access to the view and collaborate in the task category, he should be able to view the task. And if he is not if he is not have access to the campaign, he is still able to view the task from the task tray.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that was my question. Thank you.
The thing I thought you were asking is like, basically if someone gets assigned a task, but they don't have access to the campaign, there might be
Right.
this task tracker bug happening right now where it doesn't show up in the task tracker or the task tray. That might be like that's an issue we're currently solving.
Okay, I got it. Thanks, Laura.
Okay, yeah, no problem. All right, so basically granting permission. So this first sentence here is the most important. So users are less restricted by hard-coded rules associated by their role. So a lot of the engineers spent time going through the code and making sure that nothing was hard-coded, like I mentioned. So members always able to do this. That doesn't exist anymore. Now permissions are granted through direct sharing. So that's the view, comment, edit experience you guys are familiar with, and it's going to be coming all across the platform. Then there's inheritance, which you guys saw a little bit at demo day. I'm not going to spend too much time on that today, but that's basically a user can, like a campaign can choose to inherit the permissions above them, and I'll show you what that looks like. And then there's workflow assignment. This becomes, number 3 becomes the most important for rigid workflow governance, because in rigid workflow, the actions are dictating what a step assignee is able to do. So this number 3 is where it does get super complicated inside a task. If somebody has access to a specific action, they need to be able to do that action in a rigid workflow. In a flexible workflow, there's way less governance in place. So I bring that up because when you guys are debugging or going through something, you might have to think about, is this a rigid workflow? Is it a flexible workflow? Do they have access to the campaign? Do they not? Has it been shared to them? Those are kind of like the questions to think about. But number 3, the most important thing is to make sure we know what kind of workflow, because it is a little bit of a different experience if it's rigid or not. And I'll keep kind of reiterating this and explaining this, but direct sharing is pretty obvious. So let me just move your faces. This is basically task sharing we're going to be introducing this quarter. So you can give someone edit, comment, view access to a task. I need to create a knowledge base article with you guys and for you guys that explains what edit access to a task allows you to do in flexible workflow. It's different than what edit access in a rigid workflow allows you to do. Does that make sense? So if Katie gets edit access to a flexible workflow, she can edit a lot more than if she gets edit access to a rigid workflow. So that's kind of where like this workflow governance and this has to play nicely together. So this is direct sharing. Inheritance is where you can choose to inherit the campaign above you permission. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this feature because we're going to have a lot more demo days about it. But just know that users can say, hey, I want to inherit the permission of the parent. If they choose to turn inheritance off, they can make it private. But one of the use cases that we're going to try to protect customers from being able to do is removing themselves. So one of the bugs we've been seeing is that people are removing themselves from a campaign that they had access to and then not able to find it again. So that's something that might come up, but we're going to try to introduce this like revoke access experience. And without going into too much information, we are introducing a request access experience, which should help you a lot, which means if a user gets access to a campaign link or a task link that they don't have access to, they can request access to the campaign owner or the task owner. So you guys should get a lot less tickets soon at the end of this quarter where someone's saying like a task has been deleted or does not exist. They should be able to just request access and handle it on their own rather than coming to you and saying like, where did my access go? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm hoping request access makes this a lot easier for you guys, but that's one thing. And then workflow assignments, as I mentioned, so this is where these actions are actually dictating what a user is able to do. This is what's going to be GA June 1st. And I think that the most important thing to keep a lookout for this is because rigid workflow did not have governance when Task V3 launched, anybody that created a workflow from the time that Task V3 launched, they may not have their actions appropriately assigned. And so that means that they might have been able to do something in May that they can't do in June anymore for their step. And they're going to be like, wait, I could change the title before. Why can't I change the title now? And it's because rigid workflow now has governance. So I think you guys saw I drafted up like a little email template for you to kind of push flexible workflow. But feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, like Slack me if things come up around this, because I'm hoping, I think that there might be some confusion, but I'm hoping we can like solve for it quickly together. All right, so privileges. So this is where, actually, how much time do we have left? Oh, we have a good amount of time. Sorry, I know this is a lot, so I'm just kind of going through everything so you guys can like see it, look at the deck later, and then we can always come back to it and go into it in depth. But so this slide says some privileges are still hard-coded and can't be granted through permission. So these are 4 examples I just wanted to show you where you can assign to a role. If I open up the CMP, you'll see in the roles management section. So I do think it's important to get familiar with each of these options by role, because again, what I mentioned before is we do still have standard roles here. So there is that standard admin, but at any time, somebody can create a custom role and they can give a custom role this manage workflow and unlock brief privilege. They can check it off for any custom role. This basically makes that person an admin in tasks. So this is underneath the task module here. This is the most powerful thing that you can give someone in tasks. And the reason I bring that up is because someone might say, I'm not an admin, I'm a tier 2 manager and I'm able to edit and unlock briefs. You're going to get confused with like, wait, you're not an admin, but you have the admin privilege. Does that make sense? So I'm seeing this across everyone in the company, including product managers right now, where we're still speaking in terms of these like standard roles, but I don't think people realize that any role can be given this admin privilege and technically be an admin. Does that make sense? Yep. So don't take their role as like the end all be all. Just make sure to check what privileges their role actually has. The other common mistake that I've been hearing is, I'm an admin, why can't I do everything on this workflow? So keep in mind, if an admin, so if somebody gets this privilege for a role, this doesn't mean that they get override over what's been shared to them. So if I share with Rubai, if I decide to share with Rubai and he has this privilege turned on, so let's say he is a standard admin, if I share my task with Rubai and I give him comment access to my task, that still means that Rubai is only able to comment on my task. But if I give him edit access to my task, he is able to do a lot more than if I gave Victoria edit access to my task and she's a non-admin.
Quick question, Lauren.
Yeah.
In terms of just identifying or triaging when we get a ticket in terms of permissioning, the only way to see, is there a better way to see this than within their instance? Yeah, because we obviously can't log in as them. And if they're not here on a full story recording, it would be difficult to see this setting without them sending a screenshot of this, unless there's another way to go about this that I'm not thinking of.
No, you would have to come to like the user page and see what role they have and then see what privilege that role has turned on.
Oh, so
Hey,
we
hi.
can see by individual user what the secondary permissioning is for each user, or no? We just can see their high
Yeah.
level role.
No, you could see any privilege that they have turned on.
Hey,
So, like-
Lauren. Sorry to interrupt you. This is Adnan. I also have another concern. Are you exposing the history of who is giving permission to whom in any of the tabs or anywhere in CMP? Because this is the biggest problem that we face when it comes to permissioning. I have spent hours just to find out who gave someone permission to a campaign. Now, the thing that you're launching is huge, and we're gonna get a lot of tickets on this. So, is there any quick way to see the history anywhere?
So right now, the only thing that's in campaign history today, I believe, is, oh, I thought that we did show campaign owner change, but right now there is no history or even email notification for campaigns. We have to add like a epic around that to get that added. In
Because
the
you
history,
mentioned even like sending a task, right, would give someone permission.
yeah.
Yeah. So like, how would we track that even, you know?
We'd have to, I mean, you're saying every single share, we would just show it on the task history?
Yeah, like X opened X task or something. Like user opened this task, or some sort of, otherwise we're just sort of going off of their word. Which
Wait, what do you mean
might be,
open? You mean like share?
yeah.
So you're saying like if I come in here and I share this with you
Mhm.
and add you, you want history to say Lauren gave comment access to Victoria?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, even if you give someone the, yeah, this is all kinds of access you give to task or to campaigns or anywhere else. So we actually, that would be really helpful for support, especially, and just to like, in some cases, our user or the reporter doesn't want to take our word for it. Like if we explain them, this is what this was done this way, they wouldn't listen to us. And if we have a history, then we can prove to them that isn't something that is a problem on our end. This someone from your team did this.
Yeah.
Like,
So,
I can foresee issues where like, you know, like CMOs, like I shared this task and what they really did is they just copy and pasted a link to someone and they were like, do something with this, but they didn't actually share the access. And I could see us going back and forth for days on that, you know, where we could just like, versus just showing some historic data on shares.
Well, if they shared the link, we wouldn't have that history, right? So, but keep in mind, if they share that link, that person will get request access and then they'd be able to like grant that access. But to your point, we could say like task owner shared this with this person. You know
Well,
what I
couldn't,
mean?
if they do request access and then someone grants it, couldn't you show that as well?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You would show
Okay.
that, but you wouldn't show that they were sharing the link.
Got it. But that's fine, right? Because even just sharing the link doesn't grant any permission.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. But so I think this is a great point. We don't currently have tickets right now handling like updating history across the platform. That's probably going to be, if we add it, it's going to be a Q3 item. I am hoping, so the biggest thing is not who gave who permission, because like, I think at least they'll see that and anyone with edit access can see this share drop down. The biggest question mark is like when someone gets removed, explicitly removed, they're going to say like, why did I get removed? And then they'll have to request access again. So I think to your point, like seeing who does any of that, I don't want the history to get too long, but we could probably figure out how to show that somewhere in like a consolidated view.
hey, Lauren, another question. Are you going to release this to Shell as well?
Yep.
This is going to go, oh my God, this is going to create so many tickets for us. I mean, the Shell support needs to get trained on this as well, I think.
Well,
Okay,
I did speak with Shell a month or two ago when we talked about this model, because Shell is the reason this got so complicated. And they were having a lot of issues with their permissioning because they had this whole thing happening. So this is what we were removing is they wanted roles that were meant, if you were mentioned on something, you had like a drop down that said you got edit, comment, or view. If you created a task, you had edit, comment, or view. If you were assigned, you had edit, comment, or view. So Shell was getting they were getting into like the most confused state I've ever seen someone because they wanted this type of access. Now what we're doing is we're saying like, you don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to remember what role gets what. Now you just come in here, and if you mention someone inside a campaign, well, I think everyone has access to this one, but if I mentioned Adnan here, let me see if it comes up. You already had access, but let's say you didn't have access to this campaign. It would pop up and say, do I want to give you comment or edit access?
Okay, got it. This would be a lot of easier for our clients and for us too.
Yeah, I mean, here, let me just show you this. Is this really quickly? Because like, I think that I'm hoping that once customers understand what this model is, it's going to actually reduce tickets dramatically. I mean, that's obviously always the goal. So let's say I'm like, hey, check this out, comment. And now like I'm explicitly saying, hey, do I want to give you edit or comment access to this campaign? And now I want to give Adnan comment access. I'm going to go ahead, share. When I press share, we're still working on that. Then you'll notice he appears. I think we have a refresh ticket where I have to refresh it right now, but we're working on the socket update where he'll then appear in the drop down. So all of this is more like it's going to update everyone on that click. And then a new experience that we're introducing is if you decide to remove, like let's say I decide to change the parent campaign, and let's say there was a parent campaign here, we're going to have this revoke access warning where you're about to remove access from the following people if you change the parent campaign. So Adnan now has edit and can be removed. If any of these users, well, I'm not going to get into inheritance, but inheritance does make this where certain users can't be removed if they are getting their access from the parent campaign above them. So on the Shell point, I'm hoping that this doesn't create more confusion because before they had to remember what every single role was allowed to do when they were like assigned a step or commented in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. The messaging that you have like implemented is great. So does that message also show up when a client is adding a user to a step in a campaign that user doesn't have access to?
So are you saying like a step assignee in a task?
Yeah, so I don't have access to a campaign and you're trying to assign me to a task inside that campaign. So, but I don't have access to that campaign. So when you mention me or like assign me that step, should you see that message that would you like to give Adnan access to this task or something?
No, I think this one, we thought it was like very explicit. So if I'm actually assigning right content to Anik here, it just lets me assign it.
Okay.
We can, and then he does show up. This isn't working yet, but then he'll show up here as a step assignee. And if someone tries to remove Anik from this share dropdown, it's going to say you cannot remove him. He's a step assignee.
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
I mean, we can introduce that pop-up. That was something Shafkat gave feedback on where like I want to know that I'm assigning someone a task in a campaign that they don't have access to, but we decided against it because it wasn't like, it was so explicit when you're trying to get them to write content that we didn't want to like send too many pop-ups versus like mentioning someone. the reason why at mentioning someone needed a pop-up was because you needed to decide what kind of access you were going to give them. Just assigning them here, you're deciding you're going to give them right content access.
Okay. Yeah,
But
I
we
understand.
can come back to that.
Yeah, this was always an in-house issue because like most of the tickets that we get about this thing were from internal people. They assigned someone like an external writer and they didn't have access to the campaign and they brought that to us. So that makes sense.
Yeah, so that bug, that's like the number one issue I'm trying to solve for right now. We're still fixing it where, and we have like a bunch of tickets around this where if you explicitly assign, so you see how I assigned this to Anik?
Yeah.
Like he did not have access to this campaign. He was able to be assigned and hopefully this works now. We're still testing it. He should be able to come in here. It's a rigid workflow. So he should be able to come in here and only be able to write content.
Okay.
So we're trying to make it so there isn't this friction between like, oh, you didn't give him access to the campaign, so he can't do that. So I'm hoping that will reduce those tickets too.
One last question, Lauren. So is Onik, since Onik doesn't have access to this campaign right now, but you have added him to a step, is he seeing a message that that is saying, asking him to ask for permission to you in his inbox?
No. So that's the bug right now is it may not turn up in his task tray. And Anik, you could test this and let me know because this is like live testing
Sure.
that I'm doing right now. But it may not show up in your task tray or task module. That's what we're trying to like work on. But he doesn't need to request access.
Okay.
So he's going to get an email for sure. So you should definitely get an email. And you can click on the link and come in here and do the work. But he shouldn't need to request access if he got assigned.
Okay. So, and that didn't override his permission for this campaign. Like he can access to any other tasks in this campaign, right?
Correct. So
Okay.
he shouldn't be able to click on this. And when I'll share you guys a task, a separate task here. I'll share it in this like chat room. He shouldn't be able to see it.
And you're going to explain the expected behavior for flexible workflows as well, right? When it comes to permissioning.
Yeah, so flexible workflow basically has no action permissioning at all.
Oh, okay. Because it doesn't have governance.
It doesn't have governance. It does have some validation for custom fields, required custom fields and required labels that we have in the current sprint right now, where if you get assigned a action for add additional information or edit labels, and it's the last step, you have to fill in the required fields. So there are validations in place, but there isn't like permissioning on any of these tabs unless you get comment access to a flexible workflow or view access. You'll be able to essentially do anything like edit, comment, add concurrent steps if you have edit access to a flexible workflow. One thing before I forget, so Anik was just assigned a step in a rigid workflow. What we're doing is we're granting, if you don't have previous access, we're giving them access, we're giving them comment access in a rigid workflow. If I were to assign Anik this step in a flexible workflow, he would get automatic edit access. And the reason for that is because, again, in flexible workflow, you're able to do everything with edit. In a rigid workflow, edit access doesn't actually mean anything because you need to be assigned a very specific action. So we're giving them comment plus the ability to do whatever action got assigned to them. Where did that rigid workflow go? So this means that Anik got assigned this step. In the share dropdown, it would show Anik has comment access and he can come in and only write content. there's a few more things for rigid workflow, like find content. What does that allow them to do? Because we're trying to combine what each of these actions allows a user to do. I'm gonna write that up for you guys so it's a little bit easier, because I know it's late and this is a lot of information. But at least hopefully that was kind of like a quick intro of at least how this model is meant to work. And then I think we should do a couple follow-up sessions together on all of this. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that would be great. This is
Sorry
really
for joining very late on this entire meeting. But
Oh, you were
Lauren,
here.
I'm here. I'm sure that Lauren went through everything out here. Just wanted to point out the question that Ani posted on the chat. The request access experience is still being worked on Onyx, so it's not there yet. So if you guys are checking it out right now, you're not going to see it, but that's coming.
Oh, we were saying, like, if he's assigned a step, he doesn't actually have to get the request access pop up.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you guys will see, like, if you try to go to that link that I just shared above, Anik, you're not going to see request access. You're going to see task does not exist. And then the only other thing, Zahid, since you're on, I think we're fixing the issue where if he's assigned a step in a task and doesn't have access to the campaign, he's going to be able to see that he was assigned in the task tray and the task tracker, I think in the next sprint, right? That was the contributor workaround we had.
It's going to work with the task tray and task tracker, yes, later on. Soon enough, once we have the entire problem solved.
Yeah.
But that's a very rolling deploy. Like, we're going to roll this out into instance by instance. Basically, I'm sure that, Lauren, did you talk about direct shares, like how explicit share works? Great. So in that case, basically, whenever somebody is going to get assigned to a task, they'll just be having a direct share to the task. That's all.
That's what I mentioned with you guys, where they'll show up here, and then you can't remove them if they're a step assignee.
Exactly.
Unless you remove them as a step assignee.
Correct. So the chain or the pipeline of permission is like, you assign somebody, then you get an access to the task. Because you got access to the task, you're able to see that in task tracker or task tray.
And I want to add, if let's say now I want this to now be assigned to me and not Anik, he does not lose access to this task because he was given that explicit share. So we're not making it confusing where at one second you were assigned and then all of a sudden you weren't assigned and you lost access, but you got this email. That's not going to happen. They will still keep access in the share dropdown. The same goes for if I commented him in, gave him access, and then deleted the comment, that direct share will still be there because I explicitly granted them access to the whole task.
Yeah.
In order to remove that permission, we have to go into share and remove that person, right?
Yep, and you can't remove them if they're a step assignee, but once they're no longer a step assignee, you will be able to remove them. The only caveat is in the sub campaign, like we had talked about, I didn't want to talk too much about inheritance, but if they are inheriting permission from a campaign above them, you can't remove them from that sub campaign.
Is there, are there comments retained if they are removed within the task?
Yeah, if you remove the permission of the user, the comment still is retained, but the user loses access.
Okay.
So the logic that Lauren was talking about is blocking a share, like a removal of a permission or a direct share. We do the blocking for assignees only. So if you're assigned to the workflow, then we block the removal. But if you're mentioned on the comment and you suddenly remove that person, you're still okay to do that.
Okay, so let's say I assigned someone in a step, then remove that person, but he is now in the CMP in that task. Is he going to be able to take the action that was in his step previously?
It depends. If it's on rigid workflow, he is not going to be able to. If it is on flexible workflow, he's still going to be able to. Because on flexible workflow, anybody who has access to the task with edit would be able to perform. Doesn't matter whether he is assigned to the workflow or not.
And that's what we talked about. That's why like step assignee on flexible gets automatic edit access. Step assignee on rigid gets comment access.
Okay, great.
All the time, these permissions, think like a pipeline. Like, do not like every single operation that you can do inside task or inside campaign, there is a logic, and the logic is based on your object and your role privileges, like whether I have edit access, view access, comment access. Always reason with that situation, whether this person has this access, thus he will be able to like do something. Now the next part, how can we give somebody a view or comment or edit access? That can come from assigning someone, or comment mentioning someone, or even clicking on the share dropdown, assigning someone, or getting it from inheritance. There are lots of different ways where you can get access to that particular object. Then you can think about, oh, he has comment. How does he has comment? You can probably figure that out looking into those information. So always think chunk by chunk. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned you're rolling this out instance by instance. You guys have like a rolling list of that schedule so that we can sort of follow along and understand if we're getting a ticket from someone that it might have to do with this.
That's a good point, actually, Lauren. You're on mute.
The first rolling is the governance. We might do governance in 2 phases. So I'll keep you guys posted about that, but we haven't gone through the rest of the plan yet.
Okay. Yeah. If you guys are doing it sort of in batches by certain client instances,
Yeah.
just let us know or share the document with us.
Yeah, good point.
So for the rigidity, already GE Healthcare has that, right, Lauren?
Yeah.
So,
but I still think GE Healthcare might hit some things because when we rolled it out to GE, we didn't have the new code update, like the task and workflow code updates that we did. So they might see some things different. Hopefully not. But do you know what I'm talking about, Zahid?
Yeah. So
All
being
right.
alert on GE Healthcare would be good. I mean, anything that comes up, at least on the rigid workflow and on GE Healthcare, definitely that's a high alert thing, because you want to make sure that's something that is escalated to task and workflow. If they are not available, make sure that we know so that we can like tackle this as soon as possible.
Yeah, so I ran a report on all the customers that are using rigid workflow for the GA that's going to happen June 1st. And I can send that to you guys. So the big ones are GE, Lenovo, Ansel, Generali. I've kind of like run through how many workflows they've created recently that are on Task V3 and rigid. So it gives us an indication of which ones might not actually have the right actions applied or which workflows they use the most. So that will give you some more insight into like what to look out for or which customers might have sensitivity. And I have the CS team that's aware and speaking to the customers about it too before this goes live. The only other thing, Zahid, I don't know if you were on, but one of the questions Adnan had was like, can we add all of these permissioning changes into the history for campaigns and tasks? I know we haven't really talked about that, and I said that could be like a future epic for Q3, but I just want to give you a heads up on that.
Yeah, that is a thing that we talked about, but we haven't been able to get around to implement that.
Yeah.
There are a couple of things that we want to get to. The first level is the notification. Like, we want to make sure that any kind of permission changes or things that happen in a task, like let's say you get access to one, or you lose access to one, or you're getting access through an inheritance to one. All of those scenarios we're trying to figure out, and then we want to make sure that users, at least the concerned users, are getting the proper notification that they have to. That's our primary concern. And then secondary is the audit trail, like who lost access, and we want to also keep that in history. Yeah, that would be the next thing. That would definitely help for the support to like debug, but yeah, that would be at some point. But first is notification. Once we roll this framework out, first is notification, the next is audit trail.
Great, thanks, Advait.
Sure. I mean,
but like, do it really quickly because like we're gonna go crazy.
We're trying. Trust me. Like whatever we do, we're touching the entire CMP. Like permission, it change one line of code, it's impacting the entire
Yeah,
CMP
I
code
heard
base.
like
No pressure.
you're gonna put governance and permissioning on library. Library used to be such a quiet place, but now it's like a hectic place because we get so many tickets regarding library issues now.
Yeah,
Like
we haven't even added the permissions. Wait for it.
yeah, so yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, think about the little guys, man.
No,
Well,
that the point I was, I mean, for library, I think it's going to be more complicated than what we see in task and work, like task and workflow, or in campaigns, because library, I think people can relate more. Because campaign task, they consider, okay, it's a CMP object, their behaviors is defined by NewScript. But then library is more like their file system. They'll feel like, oh, I have a computer where I'm using my Drive, or I'm using Google Drive or Dropbox. They'll start expecting like a lot of similar behavior in like the library, and if they don't see something, they're just going to scream. I'm sure that you're going to get tons of feedback and product requests at that point, but we need to understand the features that we're developing and the features or the rigidity we're providing. John D. Guzman, I'm pretty sure that they will have a lot of reason for individual decisions, but it's going to be different, just to give you a heads up. It's not going to be same as Dropbox.
I think it's going to be very complicated. And
It is
Zahid
very.
and I have a meeting with the Content 360 squad tomorrow to start this conversation and make sure that whatever they introduce in library, it fits alongside this permissions framework so it doesn't contradict or confuse users. So it's not our squad, but obviously we need to make sure that the permission, you guys like know everything we just went through. We just want to explain it to a customer once. We don't want to have to explain like the library does something different. So we're going to keep a lookout for you guys on that and keep you updated.
Thank you so much.
One question around that, the thing that Lauren explained to you guys, do you think anything was out of the ordinary? Did you guys think anything was not looking standard or something was confusing?
The thing is, like, we see customers in a different way than you guys. Like you,
Exactly.
so at first everything felt a bit confusing, but when you explained your point of view and we shared ours, in some cases I think we reached a common ground, but there are a lot of things that still needs to be worked, like the putting up the history and like when you are assigning a person to a step that they're not they don't have access to, you should see the permission grant access message, and these are the things like that we think, I think especially would help more. Like if you send them a message saying ask for this person to give you permission, it makes it becomes two-step thing. But if the person that is giving the permission, if he or she sees that message, it would be a one-step thing. Like this would get easier and require less time. So
Got it.
overall I think
Or
everything
Zahid,
is really great.
he's talking about if I assign a step to someone in a task that doesn't have access to the campaign, I'm going to get like a pop-up saying, remember we had talked about this and I think we chose not to do it because it's already an explicit assignee, but we could talk about introducing the same pop-up as the app mention.
Oh, we are going to introduce the app mention pop-up.
The app mention pop-up I showed them, but on step assignee.
We want to show them. We don't show that because once I mean, it might not be needed for, or I mean, we can talk about that, but at least for the rigid workflow, you might want to like assign them and give them edit access. So we still want to have like the mention pop-up kind of pop-up comes
No,
up.
but edit access doesn't let them do anything more.
I know,
in
but
rigid.
they still can edit the task title or stuff like that, you know.
Okay. Let's talk more about it because I agree with Adnan that I think the more explicit, we've been trying to make everything as explicit as possible.
Right.
I don't think we had a ticket for this one, and I forget why we took it out.
No, we have
Uh,
that. We have like the 667 that we talked about with Bayaz. He's started working on that.
Is it for step assignees that don't have access to the campaign, they get that pop-up?
Yeah. I mean, if they don't have access to the campaign, then they don't have access to the task. That's how they get the pop-up. We always check for the task access, and the task access is given from the campaign as well. So
you're
right
saying
now,
when I assign this to Anik, okay, assuming he didn't have access previously,
Yeah.
it's going to say he doesn't have access to the campaign. Are you sure?
no, it's going to say like he doesn't have access to the task, not campaign. And the direct share is going to be added to the task, not the campaign. Are you talking about
Oh,
campaign?
okay. Yeah.
Oh, we
Okay.
shouldn't do campaign here.
No, I agree. I didn't know we were doing it for step assignees.
We're doing that separately. Yeah, we have like
Okay.
a ticket 667, which is something that we're working on.
Okay.
Yeah, we
So
can
I
talk
take back-
about it.
Okay, so what are the first thing that you're gonna roll out? Like this is a multi-step thing that I understand. So what are the first basic things that you guys are gonna roll out?
That's a great question. So I think already the mention part is there. The rollout is a bit complicated because whatever we are doing, we are bucketing that under shell roles first. Because basically shell roles is a feature flag. I mean, don't be hung up on the name because the name is very old. That's why it is there. Because initially we built the permission framework for shell, and that's why it was named as shell role, and we never removed it. So shell role is basically new permission framework. The new permission framework has all the new features of permissions that you're seeing. So whatever changes and whatever things that we are talking about are all going to be under shell role. You're not going to see these changes in any other any other organizations.
And
Now,
we're not going to do it we're not going to
Yeah.
do it in a piecemealed way.
No. And then what's going to happen is everything is going to be bucketed in shell role and then perfected in shell role, at least to the point that we know that all of our experiences has been delivered. And at that point, we start to add new instances to that shell role beta. For now, shell roles are given to Shell, obviously, and Swift Global, and NewsGrid. Only these three organizations in production, and Martin Test Group for our testing purposes, only these four in production has shell role.
Okay.
So that's the rollout plan. Like we're going to roll out one by one. First, the mentions are there already on those, like Martin Test Group, NewsGrid, and all those different places. The mention access. We're working on the task assignee access. The inheritance thing, like you can create a sub campaign which is going to inherit from the parent campaign. That is also under shell role and added to all those four instances. That's already there. And then we're working on the assignee, and then we're working on the request access. Once we get those done, our campaign sharing work should be complete. And then we're going to work some task work like task owner, task watcher. Once those are in as well, all of them are going to be in shell role. And then one by one, we're going to roll that out to like other customers. That's the plan.
The biggest first one is what Task and Workflow is releasing, which is rigid workflow on June 1st.
That is not under shell role, by the way. That is like without that, and that is going to go GA. Also, the default campaign sharing is going to go GA as well. I mean, that is not part of the shell role.
What's the default campaign sharing?
So we didn't talk about this one yet, but this is super simple. So right now, you guys know how you create every campaign. It's shared with Martin's Test Group with edit access. Every new campaign that gets created on default.
Yeah.
Customers that have access to the organization tab, so have that admin settings privilege, are going to be able to change the default campaign sharing, where they can remove the instance from being shared to every single campaign on creation, and they can add teams. So if I want a team to always get comment access every time a campaign's created, I can add that to default campaign sharing. And now if I go in and I create a campaign, it's going to have them. I know. Don't worry. I'm not going to do it. there's a save ticket that we have out for, anyways. It'll share to that team and to the instance. So I don't think you guys will get you might not get a bunch of questions about this, but you might get a question or two, like, why does, every time I create a campaign, why is it always sharing to this team? Or every time I create a campaign, why don't I see the instance anymore? It means someone changed it in default campaign sharing.
This default campaign sharing option will be only available for the admins, right?
Yeah. That settings, remember that settings privilege. So keep in mind, it might not just be that standard admin role. It might be anyone with that. Here, let me show you. This is why, like, understanding the privileges will be really helpful. But at the bottom here, where it says manage organization configuration, or no, sorry.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, it's in a weird order.
It's user, campaign, organization. Yeah, it should be like user, organization, and campaigns probably.
Yeah, anyways, it's this one. So they, again, a custom role could have that checked off, not just the standard admin role.
Oh,
And I
okay.
think the part that is a little confusing right now is there isn't like governance around who can create. Obviously the first admin can create it, but then they can create a bunch of roles and give more roles permission to a lot more privileges if they wanted to.
Yes, default campaign permissioning is gonna really help Swiss because they requested not to send notification to everyone in the instance when they created a campaign. So now
Wait, does that happen? Like, do we send in?
I tested it.
I don't think it does.
I mean, I think it happens for task creation when it is assigned to the person. I mean, if it is different than the person who created it, then they get a notification. But campaign creation, does that trigger a notification? I didn't know that it did.
Let me dig up the ticket for you guys.
Okay,
I'll let you know. Thanks.
sure.
All right, sorry, we went 30 minutes over and it's super late for all of you. So I appreciate you guys being on and awake and like attentive on a very complex topic late at night.
Thanks, Lauren. I recorded this, so I'll send it out to the team as well.
Okay, awesome. I have a few follow-up items. So again, we'll kind of continue this conversation and feel free to ping us, either me, Zahid, or the Global Collaboration Slack channel if anything comes up.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.